The next thing we need to install is the shift, I don't even know what to call this, gear. But it consists of this part right here, this little pin that you can see here, and this bolt. And they go onto the end of the shift drum. So you can see this little hole right here. The pin will go in there. And on the other side of this piece, it's almost hard to notice, but if you notice, there's a little, they all kind of look the same, but there's a little indentation right here. You see this section right there? That pin sits inside that. So we'll put this pin in there, then we'll line this up with that pin, and we'll put this bolt in. Now this bolt, it's a hex bolt. I'll figure out what size it is, but this is going to take a little bit of thread locker. And we're going to tighten this, and it only gets tightened to 17 or 18 foot-pounds, so it's not a super tight bolt. So I'm going to get you set up and we'll do this. Okay, so one of the things we need to do is we're going to, on the other side here, on that side, is where we're going to put that bolt that we need to tighten, and it's going to be very hard to tighten if this is still spinning. And we can spin this and we can kind of get it to the point where it's going to lock up against these shift forks. But what I really want to do is spin it until all of these shift forks are at the end of their play. And if you notice, you can do this here, but they're not at the end of their play. But if you spin the transmission, you see I'm spinning it with my other hand. If you spin this while you're pulling this, you'll be able to turn this until it can't turn anymore. And then all three of these will be holding this shift drum, and we'll at least have a good chance of tightening this down without damaging anything. And we'll get this other bolt in. We've got the pin put in place. Now we need to make sure that we get the indentation here that lines up with that pin over where that pin should be. So we've got that on now. So it's on. Let me make sure that I've done it correctly. Yeah, and I thought for a second that that pin, if you notice, there's a shorter, so these are kind of pointing out, and this one has kind of a concave surface. I thought it might line up with that, but it lines up with the one next to it. So just so you know, we'll make sure that one lines up correctly. And I've got it in place there. Now we'll get some thread locker on this bolt. And we're going to tighten that down to 17 foot-pounds. So we've got that put in place, and we've got the thread locker on the bolt, and the bolt tightened down to 17 foot-pounds or so. But I just want you to see that bolt was an H6. I'm going to put this tension wheel here back on, and it fits over this section right here. There's four parts to it. There's the wheel, the spring, there's a thrust washer, and there's the bolt that holds it on. I'm going to get you set up, show you how to put these together, and we'll get it put on there. So let's go over how these parts, this puzzle, goes together. You can see on the spring there is a straight part and one that has a small hook. On this tension wheel there's a small indentation, and I know it's very hard to see, my camera is not working very well, but if you can see that indentation right here, this hook goes into that indentation just like so. This thrust washer goes in between these two, like so, and then the bolt goes through. Now the way this assembly goes in here is the spring has quite a bit of tension. So what I'm going to do is this threaded piece of the bolt, I'm going to set this in there just like so. You want to make sure that the curved part is still hooked around here. The spring goes around this mounting bracket right here, and the straight part is going to push up against the side of that. And you notice, if you notice, it's going to be very hard to get that in there with the tension on the spring. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of set it in place as is. And kind of try to make sure it stays intact. Okay, sorry about that. So we'll just get the screw kind of put in place a little bit. You know, just enough pressure to hold that down, but with the spring and everything still in place. And then we can kind of pull this so it sits in the notch where it's supposed to be. And we can tighten this screw down. Now that we've got this spring in place, as you can see, we get the spring, it's tightened down about 20 foot-pounds. Everything looks to be in place, and the wheel is sitting on this, and this tensioned wheel is what keeps this from spinning too far when you shift gears. So we're gonna just kind of run through the gears right now manually. So what I'm doing is I'm going to kind of spin this with my hand. And you can see I can spin it a little bit right here. So we're going to go through all the gears. And to do that, I'm going to also have to spin this at the same time. So I'm going to be spinning the transmission on this side over here. And I'm going to be spinning the shift drum down here. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gears in first. There's first gear, neutral. Second gear, third gear, fourth gear, fifth gear, sixth gear. So everything seems to be shifting very smoothly. Let's get it back to neutral. There we go, back to neutral, and we're good to go. So now we're going to go ahead and set the external shift mechanism. And this is the piece. It goes in here, and it's what turns this when you put your foot down or up on the shift mechanism on the other side of the engine. And that's what sits here. So we're just going to slide this through. It just goes through the hole right here. By the way, there is a thrust washer here. Don't lose that. And if you can see, there's a set of springs and kind of a hole right here. This set of springs is going to sit right over this pin. So it's very hard to misalign this. We're just going to push it in there. We're going to make sure that pin sits right in between these springs. It shouldn't be hard to push down at all. It should sit straight down in there, just like so. So we've got all of the transmission together. We've got the shift drum put in. We've got tension part, the tensioner that holds it into gear, and we've got the external shift mechanism in. So I'm going to flip this engine upright, and we're going to get the rest of the engine put together. Real quick change of plans. We've got everything put in, but I forgot this part. There is this bracket that holds that bearing in place for that transmission. And you can see, if you look real close, it has some writing on it that says to the outside, or MBW outside. Either way, this means this goes outside and this flat part goes to the inside. We're going to get this put in here. It has 3 10mm bolts. And I've already tightened these two. I'm just tightening the last one. I'm not sure what the torque specs are. I don't think it's super important because it's just a bracket holding this in place. As long as you don't strip them out, you'll be fine. But there we go. I think we have crankcase put together. The next part we're going to put on is the oil pump. So this is the oil pump. And there are the 3 bolts, and if you'll notice, there is one that is slightly shorter than the other 2. So we'll make sure we get that in the right place. This is the right-hand side of the engine, so the oil pump is going to go right here. I'm going to get you set up, and we'll get that put on. I'm going to go ahead and install the oil pump here. Here's the oil pump. If you notice on the back side of the oil pump, there's a bolt right here. That bolt is going to sit in this recess right here. So we need to take this pump and make sure that that bolt is pointing up towards that recess. And we'll go ahead and slide it in there. One of these bolts was shorter than the other ones. The shorter bolt goes in the top. According to the manual, these bolts are tightened to 84 inch-pounds. I'm going to go ahead and tighten these up, and I'll be back to put on the rest of things. So 84 inch-pounds is like somewhere right around 6 or 7 foot-pounds. I'm going to go ahead and tighten them up to 7 foot-pounds. Okay, that is oil pump in. We now have the oil pump drive chain, and this chain consists of I'm showing you the channel mascot here. His name's Mac. He stays outside pretty much half the time and then comes in and cries for food. And I'm showing him to you. Well, I have to have something to fill in because I lost a little bit of the video here, so I'm just putting some space in. I think he did it. I think he lost some of my videos for me. In any case, the videos I lost were putting on the oil. Oh, yeah, see, now you're sorry, right? You're sorry you lost them? That's fine. The oil pump chain and the bolts on the bottom of the crankcase. So I'm going to go ahead and start from where I do have the videos. Right, Mac? Yeah, that's what we'll do. He's sorry, guys. Now that we have the bottom bolts on the case, we need to put the top bolts on the case. And of course, we know where they go because we drew this very, very fine drawing so that I would remember. I'm going to get these bolts put in here and we'll get them tightened down. One thing we do need to remember when we're putting these bolts back in is that these 2 bolts right here had washers on them, these brass copper washers. So make sure that they've got those on there still. So I've tightened all these up off camera. They're all tightened to 18 foot-pounds. The next thing we've got to put together is the head. And if you remember, that's the whole reason we took this engine apart, was to test these surfaces of this head and the engine block for any cracks, because we had a fluid leak. And the fluid leak is going to turn out, I think, to be a bad head gasket or a cheap head gasket that had some gunk caught between it and the surface. So we took these valves out. While they were out, I took the time to go ahead and lap them in, and I'll have that in a separate video. But it essentially means you're going to take some abrasive material, put it between the valve seat and the valve, and you kind of spin it, and it's almost like sanding, but it just clears any junk or any scratches off here to make the valve fit perfectly. So I'm going to get these valves put back in. I've got the head turned over for a reason. We're going to be putting umbrella seals, which are these new umbrella seals on. The old ones weren't horrible, This engine has about 1,500 miles on it. It's 1,500 miles, and the bike had been sitting a while, so the old umbrella seals were kind of brittle. They were a little bit stiff. So these are pretty cheap. I ordered a new set, and they go right on top of these valve guides. If you see these little tubes right there, those are the guides that the valves sit through, and these sit on top of those and kind of are clamped in place by these springs. And what these do is they keep oil from going down the valve stem and into the combustion chamber to keep it from smoking. So I'm going to get one of these put in. I'll show it to you once it's put in, and I'll do the rest of them off camera. Hopefully that's got enough light that you can see that. So I've got the one on this valve stem right here, and they just pop on there. They're not hard. I just took a pair of needle nose and kind of set it on there and just used my finger to push it on. So you can see now we've got the entire set of new umbrella seals in place. So we're going to go ahead and start getting the valves in. To get the valves put in place, we're going to need a couple of things. We're going to need, obviously, the head. We're going to need our valve spring compressor again. And we're going to need all the valves that we took out. I'm going to start with one of the intakes, and I'll show you how to put that in. The rest are very similar, almost exactly the same. The difference is that the intakes have two springs, one inside the other. The exhausts have one spring. Other than that, they're exactly the same to put in. So I'm going to get set up. I'll show you how to do that one, and I'll do the rest off camera. We've got the first intake valve here. You can see it's very clean. Got the two springs. This is the valve keeper, and these are the two halves of the keeper set that hold the entire valve in place. We're going to get the parts that match this valve out of this kit, get this kit put together. So the first thing we're going to do before we put this valve in is we're going to just put a little bit of assembly lube on. It doesn't take a lot. Just needs to be a little bit. Smear it around there. And we're just going to slide it straight into the first valve guide. So we've got the first intake valve in the head. Turn this around. We'll make sure that the umbrella seal didn't come off while we did that. The next thing that needs to go on is the set of springs. So we'll set that in there. And then there is the valve keeper. This kind of what looks like a washer. This sits over this. Now we've got to compress this down. So we're going to get our compression tool, which is here. Very hard to see the whole thing. So I've got one side here that is the same size as this valve keeper. And I've got another side here that just has to be smaller than the valve to hold it. I've got the spring compressor in place now, and you can see it's just going to push down on that side of the valve and on this side of the valve. So let's go ahead and just twist this until we start to see the end of the valve come up. Now that we've got it compressed enough that you can see the end of the valve, there's a notch in the end of this end of the valve. And that's where we're going to put these two keepers. And you can see they go in, they're kind of cone shaped this way. This smaller end goes in first, and this, I know it's very hard to see, but this top end has a notch in it. Let me just set it back down. The top end actually has a notch that fits into the notch on the end of the valve. So I'm going to get those set in there. They're a little bit finicky, so it may take me a second. So now we have the keepers in place, and you back this off very slowly and make sure those keepers stay locked in place where they should be. And you'll know that they've locked in place. We've got the first valve in place. You can see the keepers are locked in correctly. I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of these off camera, and then we'll test these for leaks. Off camera, I got all of the valves put in, and you want to make sure that all of the valves are seated correctly. If I turn this around, there's all the valves put in. So this head is ready to go on the engine. Now that the head is ready to put on the engine, we're going to finish putting the pieces on the crankcase that have to go on before the head, so we can prepare for the installation of the head. At this point, we're going to do the timing chain, the gear, and the 2 tensioners. So I'm going to get you set up, and I'll show you how to install these. So the first thing we're going to put on is this timing gear. And if you notice, there's a part in this timing gear. If you look at the inside where the splines are, right here, there's a part with no splines. And that matches up with, it's on the bottom here. So you want to make sure you get that part on there like that. Otherwise, you won't be able to get this on there. And it should just push on like so. And then you can lower the chain down through. And then just put the chain over the gear. The next piece is going to be this timing chain tensioner guide, and it's going to be held on by this bolt with the washer. For this particular one, there's no need to put any thread lock on there, so we're just going to wiggle this down in there, and it is going to go right over and if you can see, that timing chain guide just goes right over this post on the engine, and that's where this bolt goes. So we'll just get that kind of put in there, and I'll tighten this up. This bolt and the one that's going to go up here, I guess, for the actual timing chain tensioner, which is this part, are both 88 inch-pounds. We're going to go ahead and get this part put in, and it consists of this bolt. So that allows this to rotate on the bolt. And there's a washer. Make sure you have this washer. Make sure that the chain guide section, which is this section, is pointing towards the chain. We're going to slide that down in here, and it's going to sit right here. But the first thing we need to do is make sure this washer is behind this. And then the bolt goes through both. So now I've got both of these and the timing chain installed. Make sure you don't actually drop the timing chain down through here when we're putting the rest of the engine together. I'm going to go ahead off camera and tighten these. I think this is a 10 and this is a 6, I believe, hex. And they're both right around 10 foot-pounds. I want to just bring you back real quick to this. I had to put the bolt in here with the washer. This washer. We're going to get that put back in. The one thing I did forget is that this bolt that holds this timing chain tensioner in, it needs a little bit of thread lock. So I'm going to put some thread locker on it. It just needs to be medium thread locker. I know I'm using the red, but that's all I have right now. So we're just going to put some thread locker on it. It doesn't take a ton. I mean, that's plenty. We'll get this washer put back in there and get this put back on. And I had mentioned that I thought this was a 6. This turns out to be a 5. I don't know if you can see that. That is a 5. So there we have it. Timing chain and guides tensioner installed. To finish off this side, we're going to go ahead and get installed the final piece that goes on here, and that's this, what looks like a throwing star, if you can see these timing marks. And it also has a matching non-splined section, which is going to fit down here the same as the gear, and it's held on with this bolt. I'm going to put a little bit of thread lock on this bolt just to make sure. I don't think there's really any tension on it, but just to make sure. When you put this on, and yours may not look like this. This is a newer one. Some of them have missing, I'll call these teeth, but these are just splines that the Hall effect sensor reads as the engine turns for it to tell it when to spark. So the pulse generator reads this as they pass over it. You have to ensure that you put this on with the timing marks out. So let's just get it slipped on there. It just slides on like so. I'll put a little thread lock on this. Very little thread lock. Put this on. But I'm just going to hit it with my electric impact wrench real quick. One tap should be plenty. And also, by the way, this is a 14 millimeter. Just going to hit it real quick. That should be good enough. Now we're ready to install the oil pump chain and the clutch basket. And this shaft drives the oil pump chain, which is this gear and chain, and there's another gear here that goes on that shaft. I'm gonna get you set up and I'll show you how they fit together and they slide on here. So the first thing we need to do, we need to take this collar and this chain, and you want to put them together like so, with the gear towards the stop part of the collar. And then on the back of this clutch basket, there are some holes and some notches. That's what these, I'll call them splines, protrusions, whatever you want to call them. They slide, the collar slides in and they fit into those notches. So we're going to leave the clutch basket off right now. We're going to have the assembly here with the collar and the chain. And we're just going to kind of mesh both of these chains in here together like this. And we'll go ahead and put this collar on. And if you look down here, you can see that this gear that runs the oil pump assembly down here, it will only fit on one way. And then we've got this bolt. And you'll notice that this chain is fairly loose. It's supposed to be. So this is nothing to concern yourself with. There should be no tension on this chain. We've got the collar, the chain, the driving chain, and the sprocket that drives the oil pump on. I've got this loosely hand tightened. If you look right here, so we have on the back of this clutch basket, there's a gear that has to mesh in to this set of gears here. And if you look at these, they're offset. So it's hard to push that other gear onto these. This is what they call the crank sub-gear. And the trick to this is that this gear is spring-loaded. So if we come over here to the side, there's a hole right here. We're gonna put a screwdriver in this hole. If you can see right there, I've lined up that crank. There's a hole on the crank that goes through both gears. So we're going to take a screwdriver like so. It has to be like a 5 millimeters around screwdriver. You stick it in this hole and you push. You just push this way. And I'll bring you back over here so you can see. When I push this, it's going to line these gears up. Let's try to get a good view of this. If you see that, they line up. Okay? So we need to do two things at once. Push this and line the basket up. Remember that these spots, these slots, go on these protrusions on that gear here. So I'm just going to set this in place. Like so. It's not going to slide all the way back because of that gear. So we're going to push this to line it up, and then we can push this gear back. And now we're going to have to turn this bottom gear. Let me get you set down here So all I'm doing is turning this gear a little bit while I put a little pressure, and you'll feel that snap in place. Clutch basket is in place. Let's get the rest of the parts on. So the next part that goes on is this large washer, and it just goes over. Then we have the clutch drive, and it has splines, as you can see, so it will fit over the splines on the transmission. We have another washer. So I've got this nut on, and I used the impact wrench to tighten it, and then I checked it, and it's 94 foot-pounds is the torque that this is a 30 millimeter nut, and it gets torqued to 94 foot-pounds. And the next thing you need to do is, if you see there is a notch, a keyway, if you will, and there's a little lip on this nut. We want to tap that down to lock this nut in place. So we have tapped that nut down to lock it in place. So the basket is in, this is on, and we can start putting the clutch plates in.